A woman discovers her estranged family is already dividing her assets, planning her funeral, and speculating about her death while she's still alive. She decides to give them exactly what they're planning for, forcing them to confront the consequences of their greed and callousness before revealing she's been watching the entire time. I found out my family was planning my funeral while I was still alive. Worse, I watched them do it in real time. The family group chat my sister created specifically to exclude me. I shouldn't have had access to it, but I did. And that small oversight, their failure to notice I was in that chat, changed everything. I discovered my family was planning my funeral on a Tuesday morning while drinking my second cup of coffee. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, literally planning it in detail, in real time. While I was sitting in my kitchen, very much alive, checking my email. My name is Rebecca Walsh. I'm 58 years old. I'm a former financial manager at Meridian Capital. I live alone in a house I own outright, and I have a net worth most people spend their entire lives chasing. I'm also, or so I thought, someone whose family had moved past the small dramas of the past. I was wrong. It started with a notification from WhatsApp, a message in a group chat I shouldn't have been able to see. The group was called Family Matters, Important Updates Only, created 3 weeks ago apparently. But here's the thing, I was in it. I shouldn't have been. There was no invite, no notification when it was created. I simply appeared. My sister Margaret, always the tech illiterate one despite being a corporate lawyer, had accidentally added me to a chat meant to exclude me entirely. The first message I read was from Susan, my youngest sister. Mom's not looking good. I think we should start planning now. Better to have it done than to scramble when it happens. Mom? I sat there staring at my phone like it had insulted me, personally, because in that one word, Mom, I understood something. Not only did my family think I was dying, something I had no idea about, but they were already past the point of concern. They were already in logistics mode. I scrolled up. There were weeks of messages I hadn't seen. The messages started 3 weeks prior. Margaret had initiated the conversation with clinical precision. We need to talk about Rebecca. Her health is declining. We should discuss arrangements before it's too late. I had been to the doctor twice in 6 months for a routine physical and a follow-up on high blood pressure medication. High blood pressure, a completely manageable condition affecting half the population over 50. Apparently, in my family's collective imagination, I was on my deathbed. David chimed in next. I agree. Honestly, I've noticed she's been quieter lately, more withdrawn. I was quiet. I was withdrawn, not because I was dying, but because I hadn't seen any of them in almost 2 years. Not since the incident nobody acknowledged, the incident where they blamed me for my own divorce, even though James, my ex-husband, had been sleeping with Margaret. Yes, my sister, my own sister, but that was water under the bridge, according to them. Everyone kept saying it was water under the bridge, like years of betrayal just become insignificant if you ignore it long enough. So I kept my distance, quietly, professionally. I didn't attend family dinners. I sent birthday gifts with generic cards. I was cordial but distant. I had decided long ago that emotional protection was better than emotional investment. Clearly, my family had decided that my distance meant I was deteriorating. Susan's next message was almost breathless with anticipation. We should talk about the house. It's worth what? $2 million. $2,300,000 paid off, left to me by my mother 5 years ago. They all knew its value. They'd probably Googled it. Margaret responded quickly, real estate market's hot right now, but we should wait until after to sell. Don't want anyone thinking it was opportunistic. After I died, they meant. David, what about her investments? Does anyone know what she has? Margaret again. I looked through some old emails. She mentioned having a portfolio of dividend stocks. Could be significant. They had looked through her emails. They had gone through my digital life. And they were already distributing my corpse like it was an estate sale. I should have felt angry. Probably I should have screamed or cried or called them immediately. But instead, I felt something colder, clearer. I felt like someone had placed a puzzle piece perfectly into place. And suddenly I could see the full picture. This wasn't new behavior. This was just new visibility. How many times had they discussed me behind my back before? How many times had I been the subject of conversations I wasn't invited to? Decisions made about me, judgments rendered? The answer was all of them, all the times. I kept reading. Susan had sent photos, actual photos of my house, from the outside, recent photos. She'd driven by my home, which was 45 minutes from where she lived, and taken pictures of my property like she was a real estate appraiser. Beautiful bones, she'd written. Victorian, original hardwood. Probably worth even more than we thought. Then, and this is the part that made my hands shake, Margaret sent a voice memo. I played it. Girls, I've been thinking about Rebecca's funeral. I think we should do it tastefully, nothing over the top. Maybe the church on Elm Street. It's smaller, more intimate. We can probably get her cremated. It's cheaper, and honestly, it's more practical. We can scatter her ashes at that state park where Mom used to take us. Makes it feel sentimental without being expensive. Sentimental. She was making my funeral sentimental before I was even dead. And then came the message that broke something in me. Not in a cathartic way, in a way that felt like ice forming in my veins. David, has anyone talked to Thomas? He's her son. He should probably know what's happening. Thomas, my son, who they hadn't bothered to tell they thought I was dying. Susan responded, let's wait until we're certain. We don't want to worry him for nothing. For nothing. My death was being planned as a contingency, as a just in case, and they weren't even going to tell my own child until it was imminent. I set my phone down, slowly, carefully, like it might explode. I looked around my kitchen. Everything looked normal. The light was normal. My coffee was still warm. The world was exactly as it had been 5 minutes ago, and yet something fundamental had shifted. I had been waiting for my family to prove they didn't love me, and now they had, definitively, conclusively, perfectly. But here's the thing about being someone who works in finance. You understand systems. You understand incentives. You understand that people don't just spontaneously behave a certain way. They're pushed by motivations, usually financial ones, and my family had just handed me a complete roadmap of their motivations. I picked my phone back up and continued reading. Margaret had started making lists, actual lists. Rebecca's assets, estimated. House, 2.3 million. Investment portfolio, 800K, 1.2 estimate. Savings accounts, unknown but probably significant. Life insurance through previous employer, probably 500K. Jewelry, antiques, other valuables, 50 for 100K. They'd estimated my net worth at nearly $4 million. And then, the part that was almost funny in its transparency, David asked, who's going to be executor? That's important for taxes. Margaret responded, it should be me. I'm the lawyer. I can handle the paperwork efficiently. Translation, I should control all the money and make all the decisions about distributing it. Susan chimed in, but shouldn't Thomas get most of it? He's her son. And Margaret, of course, but there's no reason we can't take reasonable executor fees. And honestly, if there's estate tax, someone needs to handle that. Could be significant, could be up to 15% of the total value. 15% of $4 million, $600,000 in executor fees. That Margaret, the lawyer, the oldest, the most bitter about my success, would quietly pocket. and suddenly I understood everything. Understanding my family's financial motivation was illuminating, but it wasn't complete context. Not yet. So I did what I always do. I dug deeper. I went back through the entire chat history, scrolling backward to the first message 3 weeks prior. The real first message, the one that started it all, was from Margaret. "I need to talk to you about Rebecca. I'm worried about her health. I called her last week and she sounded off. Off." I had spoken to Margaret on a Thursday. It was a routine call. She'd asked how I was. I'd given the standard answer: fine, busy, same old, same old. And then we'd exchanged pleasantries and hung up. The call lasted maybe 7 minutes. In that 7 minutes, Margaret had decided I was sick. But here's what she didn't say. She didn't say I'd told her I was sick. She didn't say I'd admitted to any health problems. She just said I sounded off. Because Margaret had never heard me be anything other than professional. I didn't share struggles with her. I didn't confess fears or anxieties. We didn't have that kind of relationship. We hadn't had that kind of relationship since 1999, when she'd slept with my husband. So off meant not cheerful, not effusive, not performing happiness for me. In other words, I sounded like a person who had learned not to be vulnerable around family members who had proven they would weaponize that vulnerability. Susan had immediately reinforced the narrative. She's definitely isolated herself. I invited her to book club 2 months ago. She said no, and I haven't seen her at church in forever. Church? I'd never been a regular church attendee, but Susan was trying to establish a pattern of withdrawal, and the absence of something I'd never done regularly was, apparently, evidence of decline. David added, "She's been through a lot, the divorce, everything with Margaret. Maybe she's depressed." Finally, someone mentioned the actual source of my isolation, but Margaret shut that down immediately. That was years ago. She needs to move on. Besides, she's always been dramatic about the divorce. It wasn't even that bad. It wasn't that bad. My husband of 21 years slept with my sister for 2 years. It wasn't discovered through confession. It was discovered through a cell phone I found in his gym bag. 1 year of gaslighting later, a second cell phone confirmed it was ongoing. When I confronted them both, Margaret cried and said it was a moment of weakness. James said he'd been unhappy in our marriage. My mother, may she rest in peace, advised me to try harder to make the marriage work. The marriage ended. Eventually, my mother came around. Margaret never did. She never apologized. Not once. She just waited for me to pretend it hadn't happened. And when I wouldn't, when I maintained my distance, my politeness, my cool professionalism, that distance was evidence of my emotional instability, not evidence of good boundaries, not evidence of self-protection, evidence of pathology. I spent the next 3 hours in my kitchen reading through every single message in that chat. And what emerged was a portrait of a family that had constructed a complete alternative version of me in their minds. Rebecca, in their version, was sick, or no evidence. Depressed, no evidence. Alone, by choice, yes, but deliberately mischaracterized as isolation. Financially irresponsible. I had never mentioned financial problems, they'd simply assumed. Without adequate support systems. True, but deliberately. Getting worse? No timeline, no specifics, just a vague sense of decline. Rebecca, in reality, was healthy, high blood pressure, managed, solitary by design. I enjoyed my own company, financially secure, extremely, deliberately distant because family had proven untrustworthy, supported by myself, autonomy, not abandonment, living exactly the life I'd designed. But the version of me they'd created was much more useful to them because a sick, lonely, depressed Rebecca was a Rebecca who would be grateful for their attention, a Rebecca who might make impulsive decisions about her estate, a Rebecca who could be guided, managed, controlled. And when that Rebecca eventually died, Well, obviously, they'd need to manage her affairs. Obviously, the considerable estate would require professional handling. Obviously, grief would make them deserving of some compensation for their trouble. There was a message from Susan that particularly crystallized this. Maybe we should reach out to her more, like actually spend time with her, in case we don't get another chance. We could feel like we tried. Feel like we tried. Not actually try. Not actually reach out in a genuine way. Not actually apologize for betrayal or acknowledge hurt. Just feel like they tried. It was performance. All of it. Every piece of concern they'd constructed was performance. And the audience was their own collective conscience, which apparently required the illusion of trying before Rebecca's death could be properly monetized. I closed my laptop. I sat in my kitchen for a long time, not thinking, just existing in a state of perfect clarity. And then I made a decision. I was going to give them exactly what they were planning for, but I wasn't going to do it stupidly, and I wasn't going to do it emotionally. I was going to do it strategically. First, I needed to understand what I was working with, so I opened my financial files. My house, $2.3 million, accurate. My investment portfolio, $1.4 million. They'd underestimated. My savings, $340,000 liquid. My life insurance, $600,000 from my previous employer, still active. My valuables, probably close to their estimate, maybe higher. Total net worth, approximately $4 million. Margaret's potential executor fee at 15%, $696,000. That was the amount that made her risk exposure comfortable. That was the amount that made my death a profitable event. I also had something they didn't know about, a trust I'd created 5 years ago, shortly after my mother died. The trust specified that upon my death, my assets would be distributed directly to my son, Thomas, with no executor role needed. The trust bypassed probate entirely. The trust made the entire executor fee argument moot. But they didn't know about that trust. They'd never asked. They'd never actually engaged with the legal complexity of my situation. They'd just assumed I was disorganized and dying, which meant they'd get to organize my death. I pulled up my will, which was separate from the trust and deliberately vague, and confirmed what I remembered. It left everything to my son, Thomas, with no specification of how he should distribute it to other family members. Perfect. Now I needed to understand their timeline. When did they think I was dying? How much time did they think they had? I scrolled back through the messages looking for indicators. Margaret, I think we should be realistic. She's not going to be around much longer. We need to be prepared for that eventuality. Not much longer. That was vague but ominous, but there was no actual evidence she was dying soon. They were just extrapolating from my withdrawn behavior and my off phone call. Susan, should we try to visit her, see if she needs anything? Margaret, not yet. Let's give her space. When she's really sick, she'll reach out. Then we can make our move. Make our move. As though my deterioration was a business opportunity with a specific moment to act. The timeline was indefinite. They were prepared to wait, but they were also prepared to strike whenever the opportunity presented itself. They were waiting for me to show visible signs of decline so they could swoop in with concern and start managing my affairs, which meant I had flexibility. I could choose when this happened. I could orchestrate the entire sequence. And that's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched my family in that group chat with the fascination of someone observing a species they'd previously misunderstood. I didn't intervene. I didn't reveal myself. I just watched. And what I watched was a masterclass in how people convince themselves that selfishness is love. David posted a message. I was thinking about Rebecca. She's always been so independent. Maybe that's part of her problem. Maybe she needs more family involvement. Translation: her independence is the problem. She won't let us manage her life. We should fix that. Margaret responded, "You're right. After she's gone, we can use her assets to fund some family initiatives, like a scholarship fund in her name. That way, her money is actually helping people instead of just sitting in accounts." Her money, already redistributed, already decided. Her legacy would be managed by Margaret, filtered through Margaret's vision of what Rebecca should have wanted, controlled by Margaret's judgment about how it would be most beneficial. Susan added, "That's beautiful, Margaret. Rebecca would love that." Rebecca didn't get a say. Rebecca was already dead in their minds. Rebecca was an abstraction, a collection of assets, a problem to be solved. I kept reading. Thomas, my son, had apparently reached out to Margaret with a casual question, something mundane about Christmas plans, and Margaret had responded warmly, as though she hadn't just spent 3 weeks discussing his mother's death in a secret group chat. She sent him a message visible in the family chat. "Talked to your mom the other day. She sounded a little tired. Just checking on her. You good, kiddo?" That message was designed for me to potentially see. It was performance. It was the face they wanted to show the world. Concerned Margaret, the dutiful aunt, the woman who checks on family. But in the private chat, she'd followed up, "I didn't mention our concerns. No point worrying him until it's necessary." Until it's necessary. Until it's time to deliver the news that his mother is dead and his aunts need to help distribute her estate. I was struck by the efficiency of their cruelty. It wasn't even angry. It wasn't vicious. It was so matter-of-fact that it was almost worse. They weren't actively wishing me dead. They just accepted my death as inevitable and moved on to the logistics with the same energy they'd apply to a household renovation. Then something shifted. Margaret sent a message that changed the tenor of the entire chat. "I think we should reach out to Rebecca and actually invite her to something. Make it look natural. We don't want her to think we've abandoned her." Make it look natural was the key phrase. They were going to stage concern. They were going to suddenly become present in my life, ostensibly because they loved me, actually because they needed to gather intelligence. They needed to see if I really was sick. They needed to evaluate my mental state. They needed to assess whether my death was imminent or if they should adjust their timeline. Susan was enthusiastic. "Good idea. I could invite her to book club. Actually, I could make it a thing, like bring back the book club tradition." David: "What about Thanksgiving? I could invite her for dinner." Margaret: "Yes, both. Multiple contact points. Let's see what she actually looks like these days. Maybe she's fine and we're worrying for nothing." Worrying for nothing was such a mild way to phrase planning someone's funeral and dividing their estate. And here's what I realized. They were going to try to see me. Soon. They were going to stage an intervention of concern, and when they saw that I was healthy and functional and not falling apart, they were going to be disappointed. Because a healthy Rebecca didn't fit their narrative. A healthy Rebecca meant they'd wasted emotional energy on someone who didn't need rescuing. A healthy Rebecca meant they'd have to actually face the fact that my distance wasn't a symptom of illness, but a symptom of not wanting to be around them. And they wouldn't be able to handle that, because they needed me to be the problem. They needed my dysfunction to justify their financial interest in my estate. So I made a decision. I was going to give them something real to worry about, and then I was going to show them exactly what they'd done. I spent the next month doing something I'd become very good at over 58 years, planning. First, I called my attorney, Victoria Chen. Victoria had been my lawyer for 12 years. She knew everything about my financial situation. I explained what I'd discovered in the family chat. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You want to teach them a lesson," she said. I want them to understand what they've done, I replied. Those might not be the same thing, she said carefully. But she helped me anyway. Victoria was the kind of lawyer who respected her client's autonomy, even when that autonomy led toward unconventional solutions. Here's what we did. I created a new will that superseded the existing one. This will was very specific. It left 80% of my estate to Thomas, as I'd always intended. But it also included a detailed codicil, basically a letter, that would be read publicly at the execution of the will. The letter detailed everything. Every message in that group chat, every instance of their financial speculation, every moment of performance. It would be delivered to my son, to the executor, to anyone Thomas wanted to share it with. That's brutal, Victoria said, reviewing the language. It's honest, I replied. I amended my existing trust to include a stipulation. In the event of my death, Thomas would receive the bulk of the assets directly, but the trust would fund a specific project. A scholarship fund, ironic given Margaret's suggestion, but controlled by Thomas, named after me, and deliberately structured in a way that would preclude Margaret from having any management role. And in the trust language, I included a specific clause. If any family member contested the will, challenged the trust, or attempted to prove undue influence, the estate would automatically fund legal fees for Thomas's defense, and any contested amount would be tripled and placed in escrow, unable to be accessed by any party for 10 years. In other words, if they tried to fight it, they'd be paying for their own defeat, and the money they were fighting over would be untouchable for a decade anyway. That's strategic, Victoria said, and I heard something that might have been approval in her voice. I updated all of my insurance beneficiaries. I confirmed all of my banking contacts. I made sure every single financial document had clear, unambiguous instructions that would be triggered upon my death. I also, and this was important, I made backup copies of everything, encrypted copies stored with Victoria, and I sent a sealed letter to Thomas to be opened if something happens to me. In that letter, I explained the situation with the family, the financial arrangements, and, most importantly, I included all of the screenshots from the group chat. The letter was notarized, it was dated, it was bulletproof. I scheduled a comprehensive physical, full blood work, full evaluation. Everything was documented, everything was recorded. I had my doctor create a formal summary stating that I was in excellent health for my age, with no terminal diagnoses, no concerning developments, and no medical reason to expect mortality in the near future. I received that summary in writing, signed, dated, medical letterhead. Then I printed it, multiple copies, and I placed it in a manila envelope in my safe. And then I did something that surprised even me. I created a video of me dated and time-stamped, in which I spoke directly to my family. I didn't send it, I didn't upload it, I just made it, and I gave it to Victoria to hold. In the video, I was calm, professional, eerily composed. If you're watching this, I said into the camera, it means I've died. It also means you discovered the will. It also means you discovered the letter inside the will, explaining what you did, what you planned, what you discussed while I was alive, and reading every single message. I let that sink in for a moment on video. I want to be clear about something. I'm not angry. Anger would suggest I felt betrayed. Betrayal would suggest I expected better. And I've spent a lot of years learning not to expect better from you, so I'm not angry. I'm just done. And this video is my goodbye. I paused. I looked directly at the camera, directly at them, even though they didn't know it yet. You were given a choice. At any point in the last 2 weeks, you could have deleted that chat. You could have stopped the speculation. You could have reached out to me honestly. You could have asked how I was doing. not as a pretext to assess my mental decline, but as people who actually cared. You didn't. You chose different, and this is what that choice costs. I ended the video. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't vindictive, it was just the truth delivered calmly, and I gave it to Victoria. After a month of preparation, I was ready. I called Susan. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light. "It's been a while." "Rebecca," she sounded almost shocked to hear from me. "I was just thinking about you. How are you?" Probing, already assessing. "I'm good," I said. "Actually, I'm calling because I want to make a change. I've been isolated too long. I think it's time to reconnect with the family." I could practically hear the smile in her voice. The family chat was about to get very active. "That's wonderful. We'd love that." Margaret was just saying. She caught herself. She'd almost revealed the group chat. We were all hoping you'd want to spend more time together." "Well, I do," I said. "In fact, I was thinking about planning something that would bring everyone together." "What did you have in mind?" Eagerness, barely concealed eagerness. "A family dinner," I said. "My house. 2 weeks from Saturday, nothing fancy, just all of us. And I want to talk about some things. I want to reconnect, and I want to discuss my future, my plans, things like that." I could feel her processing this. A dinner at my house, an opportunity to see me, an opportunity to assess my health, an opportunity to have conversations that would inform their plans. "That sounds perfect," she said. "I'll tell the others." "Great," I said. "And Susan, I need a favor. I need you to make sure Thomas comes. Tell him I'd really like him to be there. I have something I want to discuss with him in particular." "Of course. What is it? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, and I meant it. "I just want to talk to him about the future, family things. You'll understand when you're there." After I hung up, I set a timer. 2 weeks. That's how long I had. I spent those 2 weeks very carefully. I didn't change anything obvious. I still maintained my normal routine. I still went to the gym. I still worked on freelance consulting projects. I was my normal, solitary self. But I also left things behind. Subtle things. I left my medical records, the ones stating I was in excellent health, visible on my desk. Not deliberately placed, but accidentally visible if someone were snooping, which, given that this was going to be my house and they were going to be looking for evidence of my decline, they absolutely would. I also cleaned my medicine cabinet. I removed the high blood pressure medication. Not all of it, just enough that the bottles looked old, untended. I replaced it with over-the-counter supplements and basic painkillers. The visual narrative I was creating. A woman who'd stopped managing her health. A woman in decline. A woman who'd let things slip. I also, and this was important, I made small modifications to my appearance. Nothing dramatic, but I wore less makeup. I wore looser clothing. I angled my body a certain way in the mirror so I could see what they would see. A woman who'd deteriorated slightly. I wanted them to see exactly what they expected to see. A woman on the precipice. A woman whose death was becoming a reality rather than an abstraction. I wanted them to feel the satisfaction of being right. The dinner was scheduled for Saturday at 6 p.m. By Friday night, the family group chat was ablaze with activity that I was finally allowed to see. Margaret, I'm nervous about seeing her in person. What if she's really sick? Susan, we'll know soon enough. Just act natural. David, should we try to talk to her about medical decisions like power of attorney? Should she have that in place? Margaret, not yet. Let's see what she's like first. See what she's like. Assess her. Determine her viability. Thomas arrived at my house at 5:45. I'd given him a heads up that this dinner was important, that I had some things I wanted to discuss. He'd sounded curious but not alarmed. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving me a careful hug. My son was 32 now, and he'd inherited my practical nature and my emotional reserve. He didn't do a lot of emotional processing, which was ironic given the emotional minefield I was about to navigate. "Thanks for coming," I said. "I know family dinners can be boring." "It's good to see you," he said, and he meant it. Thomas was one of the few people whose intentions I didn't doubt. The rest of the family arrived within minutes of each other. Margaret, David, Susan. Their faces were a study in concealed disappointment. I looked to them exactly like what they expected. Tired, older, frailer. "Rebecca," Margaret gave me a hug that felt like a scientist examining a specimen. "You look well. How are you feeling?" "Good," I said. "Really good. I've just been taking some time for myself." "We noticed," Susan said, and there was concern, the performed kind, in her voice. "You haven't been as social lately." "I've been intentional about my solitude," I said, which was honest but would sound melancholic to them. "I think sometimes people need space to reflect." Reflect was a word sick people used. Time for reflection before the end. We sat down to dinner. I'd prepared a simple meal, pasta, salad, bread, nothing taxing. Another signal, a woman managing her energy. As we ate, Margaret did exactly what she'd planned to do. She probed, gently, professionally, like the lawyer she was. "So, what made you want to have us all here?" she asked. "Is there something specific you wanted to talk about?" "A lot of things," I said. "It's been a long time since we've all been together. I thought it was time." "That's nice," David said awkwardly. David was never good at emotional moments. He just made awkward noises and waited for someone else to take the lead. "Actually," I said, setting down my fork, "there is something specific. I want to talk about my future, my plans, and I want to make sure you all understand what I want." Margaret leaned forward. Susan leaned forward. Even David leaned forward. They were ready. They were expecting me to tell them that I was sick. They were prepared to respond with concern and suggestions about managing my affairs. Instead, I looked at Thomas. "Thomas, I want you to know that I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I want my legacy to be, about what I want to leave behind. And I've made some decisions about my estate. I've updated my will. I've created specific trusts, and I want you to understand the reasoning behind those decisions before anyone else hears about them." Thomas looked surprised. He didn't know this was coming. "Okay," he said carefully. "I'm leaving the bulk of my estate to you," I said. "Not because I don't love your aunts, but because I want my assets to be managed by someone I trust completely, someone whose intentions I don't question." Margaret shifted in her seat. I could feel her calculating. "That's very generous," she said carefully. "But Rebecca, you should think about whether there might be other considerations. Family relationships, for instance. I mean, Thomas might feel burdened." "He won't," I said, "because I've been very specific about the structure. Victoria Chen has drafted everything. It's airtight. Thomas won't have to manage any of it. The trust will be professionally managed. His job is simply to receive the benefit and, when he's ready, decide what to do with it." "Well, that's good," Margaret said, recovering quickly. "And what about your funeral arrangements? Have you thought about that?" And there it was. The direct question. The moment where she revealed what she was actually concerned about. "My funeral arrangements." "Actually, yes," I said. "I've thought about that quite a bit, and I've written down exactly what I want. I'm giving those instructions to Thomas, and I'm also giving them to Victoria, and I'm also posting them in my will." "That's very organized," Margaret said, and I heard the frustration underneath. She'd imagined herself planning my funeral. She'd imagined managing that narrative. "I am organized," I said. "In fact, I'm organized about everything in my life. my finances, my health, my plans. I'm more organized now than I've ever been. Susan looked at me more carefully. I could see her mental calculations adjusting. I didn't look as sick as they'd imagined. "You look good, Rebecca," she said, and there was a note of disappointment in it. "Really healthy." "I am healthy," I said. "I had a complete physical last month. Everything is fine. Better than fine. I'm in excellent health for my age." I watched Margaret's face carefully. She'd built an entire narrative around my decline, and I'd just dismantled it with a simple statement about medical records. "That's wonderful news," she said, but there was an edge to her voice. "Isn't it?" I said brightly. "I've actually been feeling the best I've felt in years. In fact, I've decided to make some changes. I've cut back on my freelance work. I'm going to travel more. I'm going to actually enjoy my life instead of just existing in it." "That sounds lovely," Susan said, but she sounded confused. This wasn't how the narrative was supposed to go. I turned to Thomas again. "I also want you to understand something about this dinner, about why I invited everyone here. I need you to understand that your aunts and uncle care about me very much. But sometimes people's care gets tangled up with other things, financial things, inheritance things. And sometimes those tangles make it hard for people to be clear about what they actually want versus what they actually need." Thomas was watching me carefully. He was starting to understand that something else was happening here. "What do you mean, Rebecca?" Margaret asked. I took a breath. "I mean that I've become aware of some conversations that have been happening. Conversations about my health, my future, my estate, and I want to make sure there's no confusion about where I stand." The room went very quiet. Susan's face had gone white. She was doing the math, realizing that I knew about the group chat. "I'm going to be very direct," I said. "If anything were to happen to me, if I became sick, if I deteriorated, if I died, I want everyone here to know that I have already planned for that. I have already decided how my affairs will be managed. I have already decided what my funeral will look like, and most importantly, I have already documented my wishes in a way that cannot be misinterpreted or changed." Margaret stood up. "I don't know what you're implying, Rebecca, but—" "I'm not implying anything," I said calmly. "I'm being direct. You've made assumptions about my health, my mental state, and my financial situation. You've made plans based on those assumptions, and I'm here to tell you that those assumptions are wrong. And more importantly, I'm here to tell you that I know. I know what you've been planning. I know what you've been discussing. I know what you've estimated my estate is worth. And I want you to understand that none of that matters, because I have already taken steps to make sure that my wishes are honored regardless of your involvement." David looked like he might be sick. "How do you know what we've been discussing?" Susan asked quietly. "I was added to the group chat," I said. "It was an accident. You forgot to exclude me, and I've been reading every single message. Every speculation about my health, every estimation of my assets, every plan to use my funeral as an opportunity. I've read all of it." There was a long, terrible silence, and then Margaret's face changed. The concern drained away. The performance stopped, and underneath it, I could see exactly what she was, a woman whose financial calculations had just been revealed to be exactly what they were. Calculations, not concern, not love, just math. "Well," she said, her voice very cold, "I think we've all misunderstood each other." "No," I said, "I understand exactly what's happened, and I've made my peace with it, which is why I'm telling you now so you can make your peace with it too. Because when I die, and eventually I will, just like everyone does, my estate will be distributed exactly as I've planned. You won't have a say, you won't have an opportunity to manage it, you won't be able to contest it, and you won't be able to use my death as a financial opportunity." Margaret walked out. just stood up and walked out of my house. David followed her, looking confused. Susan stayed for another moment. "We were just worried about you," she said quietly. "No," I replied, and my voice was the coldest she'd ever heard it. "You were just planning my death. There's a difference." She left too. Thomas and I sat in silence at my dining table. "Did you really plan all of this?" he asked after a moment. "Yes," I said. "I've planned everything, including the part where your aunts and uncle realized that their assumptions about me were wrong, and their plans for my estate were even wronger." "Was it worth it?" he asked. I considered the question, the dinner, the confrontation, the satisfaction of seeing Margaret's face when she realized she'd been caught. "I don't know yet," I said. "Ask me in a year." 6 months later, Margaret attempted to contact me 3 times. Each contact was rebuffed by Victoria. Each contact was an attempt to reconcile or discuss misunderstandings. There was nothing to reconcile. There was nothing to discuss. David sent me an apology email. Sincere, probably. Useless, definitely. Susan tried to visit my house once. I didn't answer the door. Thomas received calls from Margaret asking detailed questions about my financial situation. He recorded each call per Victoria's instructions. He didn't answer any questions. Life went on, but it went on differently now. I had spent 58 years trying to maintain family relationships with people who had proven repeatedly that they didn't deserve maintaining. Now I didn't have to, because I'd shown them the truth. And the truth was that my choice to distance myself wasn't pathology. It was wisdom. It was self-protection. It was the right response to people who had betrayed and then tried to profit from that betrayal. The group chat still exists, as far as I know, but I don't read it anymore. I don't have access anymore. Victoria made sure of that the day after the dinner. Sometimes I wonder what they're discussing, whether they've moved on to speculating about someone else's death, whether they've learned anything. But mostly, I don't think about them at all, because I finally have what I've always wanted. The freedom that comes from completely severing ties with people who were never actually tied to me in any meaningful way. My family didn't love me. They loved the idea of my assets. And now that they know I know that, everything's much clearer. The rest is just the quiet satisfaction of a life lived exactly as I want it.